There's always been a need for a tour like the Web.com tour, and the launching of this tour, which we made the deal in 1988, announced it in '89, and that had the first year of participation in 1990, was either the third, depending upon how you want to count it, the third or the fourth try. There was tournaments that were called the second tour events. That was back in the late 60s, early 70s. And then there was the Tournament Player Series. So this is at least the third try of establishing a tour that was designed to give players an opportunity to hone their skills to be successful at another level. Ben Hogan was not involved in any of the lead up. As a matter of fact, we made the business deal with Mr. Isatani, who owned the Ben Hogan Company at the time and actually owned Pebble Beach at the time. And we made the agreement to sponsor the what was then called the Ben Hogan Tour with Mr. Isatani. And Ben Hogan did not know about it. And as my recollection is that the executives that worked for Mr. Isatani were a bit afraid to tell Ben what they'd done. So they asked me to go to Fort Worth and sit down with Ben and tell them. So Ben's first knowledge of it was after the deal was done. And so I went down to Fort Worth and sat down with Ben and told him what he's doing, and his reaction was more than positive. As a matter of fact, I remember as clear as it was yesterday that he looked me straight in the eye, as he always did, and said, Deane, if there had been a tour like this when I was trying to be successful in the tour, I would have been successful 10 years sooner. So he was a strong proponent, and he was delighted to have his name associated with something that he knew would have benefited him had it been around when he was trying to be successful on the tour. He participated in the announcement, the formal press announcement of the establishment of the tour, and had a lot of good things to say about being associated, and proud that his company was associated with it, and thought it was a really good thing to do. He didn't go out and visit events, and we tried to invite him to a couple places, and it was not possible for him to travel at the time. So, but I know he was interested. He was terribly interested in its being successful, and I think anything that had his name on it, he wanted it to be successful. With the Ben Hogan Company involved, and with substantial financing from them, it was quite a commitment. The tour also made a strong financial commitment. We put together quite a small staff, actually, and it took them a year to put together a schedule. I can tell you that some of the staff were not happy that they only had a year to put together a full tour, but they got it done, and they were. It was a project that was very difficult to be successful. To be able to put a 25 or 30 tournament schedule together in a year, when it's taken half a century to build the PGA Tour, and they had a year to do it. So there were still 4 events that were in that original group. I did go to the first event in Sacramento, California, and was delighted to hit the first ball off the first tee in Sacramento, and it was. I think that the success of the Web.com tour, which started as the Ben Hogan tour, has helped literally hundreds of players become successful. I practiced a little bit the first couple days before I knew I was going to have to hit the first tee shot, but It was a thrill for me to be directly involved in developing something that I knew would help a lot of players. And I don't know the numbers of how many tour wins have come out of players that earned their stripes on the Web.com tour, but there's a lot of them. Oh, I think they're completely different kind of players. There's a huge distinction. Today's golf game is your likelihood of being successful on the PGA Tour or the Web.com Tour, if you can't hit it 300 yards and carry it in the air probably 270 or 280, are very, very small. In years past, golf was played differently. It's almost a different game at the highest level. The skills necessary to succeed 30 and 40 years ago are some of the skills are the same, but unless you can hit it 300 yards or plus, the answer is your chances of success are substantially diminished. We wanted an orderly way that players could learn their trade and be successful on the PGA Tour. At the time that we were fortunate to get the Ben Hogan company to sponsor what was then the Ben Hogan Tour, we were following our second failure of trying to establish this kind of a system. So it serves a lot of purposes. It's very important. And I think we've seen, as a result of the success of this tour, we now have the PGA Canadian Tour, and the PGA in South America, we have a South American tour. And part of the Web.com is international too. So we see, just as the whole game of golf is growing internationally, so has the Web.com tour grown, and will continue to grow. The only thing that surprises me is that it didn't happen a little sooner. I can recall back in the early 80s, this is the early 80s, not, I became commissioner in 1974, but it was the late 70s or early 80s. We recognized where golf was going international. And we held a series of international matches between the U.S. and Japan first. And then following that, we had what was called the Four Tours Championship, with the European Tour and the Asian Tour and the U.S. Tour and I believe Australia, New Zealand, played an international match. And those things were happening back in the 80s, so it doesn't surprise me at all that a tour like this would what you call bust the borders of the U.S. and go international. That always varies. The ones that were launched the best are probably still the survivors, the four that are still left. Some of them were put together without as much professional management, with all good intentions, and didn't survive. Just like the PGA Tour in the 30s. And if you look, even in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a lot of turnover of cities. You look at the schedule of the 1960s on old tour books, and then look at how many cities we played in that are no longer on the schedule. But a lot of those cities are holding senior events, and a lot of those cities are holding Web.com or events. So there's a lot of tour history behind some of the venues that we're playing now in some of the cities. I don't know that anybody could predict that and predict the turnover, We certainly would like to have complete stability, but circumstances change. But we have a good, solid schedule in cities that benefit by the events. The players benefit by playing in it, and the communities, because of the money that is thrown off from charity from all of these events. So do the volunteers in the communities that we play in, are all benefiting from this. So it's a shared benefit from both players and the communities. Probably the most interesting story of all this was when I sat down with Ben Hogan to tell Ben that his company was going to sponsor this, and broke the news to him, and he was delighted. But our conversation segued into equipment and equipment technology, and so we had a big discussion about that. And I told Ben that I had tried playing what was the successor of the original Top Flight, the Pinnacle ball, and I'd played in some competition using it, and I had some difficulty hitting certain shots with that ball. And Ben says, well, if I were playing today, I'd be using what he called a Serlin covered ball, which is the Pinnacle type ball. And I asked Ben point blank, I said, well, Ben, why would you do that? And he stared at me and probably paused for 10 seconds. That seemed like 12 minutes when he paused. And he said, because it's better. And I paused for about 12 seconds and looked him in the eye, and I said, well, Ben, why is it better? And sat forward my desk, and he sat back in his chair like this. And he sat up in his chair. He says, I'm not going to tell you. Thank you very much. Shake hands. Meeting over. But we all need to be thankful for Ben, because without Ben Hogan, there wouldn't have been a Ben Hogan company, even though it was an internationalist who owned the company at the time that made the decision to do it. It was Ben Hogan's heritage that made it possible. And there are hundreds of players who've benefited by that legacy, and we all ought to be thankful. I think it's a permanent part of the landscape of competitive golf at the highest level. It is the way to get to the PGA Tour, which is the most important tour in the world. It provides the proving ground and the learning ground for young players to hone their skills, to be successful on the PGA Tour. It's been very good for the players over the last 2 or 3 decades, and it will be for a long time to come.